Well, 8 weeks ago this morning, we all woke up to a horrifying video of watching George Floyd lose his life under the knee of a Minneapolis police officer. And in the last 8 weeks, we have heard Minnesotans and people around the world say that we need change now, not someday, now. And last night, the Minnesota House of Representatives and the Minnesota Senate passed a bill that will be headed to Governor Tim Walz's desk today that brings changes now. It's not nearly enough, but it is a considerable step forward. I'm incredibly proud of the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus for their brave leadership at this very trying time. First, COVID-19 struck, and then the injustice of George Floyd's murder. They've been steady leaders throughout, especially Representative Rena Moran and Representative Carlos Mariani. The families of the victims came forward and testified at our hearing on June 13th. I think many of you followed that hearing. 8 hours of input from the community and the families. They really drove this conversation. George Floyd's nephew said, please pass a ban on chokeholds. We finally secured that in negotiations on Wednesday of this week. Commissioner Harrington and Schnell, Attorney General Ellison, Representative Moran spent a year on the deadly force task force, traveling around the state, listening to families, looking at policies that we could put in place that would make it less likely that people would lose their loved ones at the hands of police. And they continued to work after George Floyd was murdered and really intensified their efforts. And it's thanks to all that work that we were able to pass a really great bill last night that should become law today. I think that's about all I will start out with. I'll turn it over to the Majority Leader to make a few comments, and then I'll mostly spend time answering questions.
Yes, yesterday was a significant step forward for police reform and accountability. It took place because so many people worked very hard, especially our People of Color and Indigenous Caucus members and our leaders on the Public Safety Committee. But it was a team effort all around. In fact, many law enforcement groups, including police unions, came forward to compromise. Other labor unions came forward to accept changes to arbitration provisions for police officers. We had a broad level of support from the business community and from people on both sides of the aisle. These are the kinds of reforms that can stand the test of time. But as the speaker said, they do not go far enough, and we do know that we're going to be coming back to push harder for more change. We have a situation, particularly in the city of Minneapolis today, that requires almost starting over. Not to get rid of a police department, but to rebuild it on the ground, on the basis of equality and justice in the community. And we see these problems everywhere in the state. So this is part of a longer conversation. But these reforms that we passed today are a very strong start towards the kind of change we need in order to make sure that everyone can go home safe at night, regardless of what they look like or where they live. We also saw that kind of bipartisan work fall apart when it came to the bonding bill, with the continued insistence of House Republicans that the governor should give up his peacetime emergency powers in order to get a jobs bill. We have a significant need for job creation because of the recession caused by COVID-19, but we can't stop fighting COVID-19 at the same time. And that is the impossible choice forced upon the governor and the Republicans in the Senate, Democrats in the Senate, and Democrats in the House by the House Minority Caucus, the Republican caucus, led by Representative Dowd. That impossible choice cannot be resolved unless he is willing to come to the table and negotiate and compromise in a real way. And that is the remaining work, together with a tax bill, supplemental budget bill, and relief and support for people in Minneapolis and St. Paul who were damaged by the civil unrest. So we took a significant step forward, but continued obstinance and obstruction by House Republicans continues to hold us back from the rest of the work that's in front of Minnesota today.
All right, Ted, if you can read the questions, that's helpful.
Yep. So first one is from Kevin Featherly. He says there was a lot of praise for the bill, but some criticism that it didn't go far enough. Some pledged to keep working for more comprehensive reform. This topic absorbed much of the energy in 2 special sessions. If we go to another special session in August, will further work on this issue be set aside in favor of other efforts like bonding?
I think the Senate was pretty clear that they believe that the kind of extensive reforms that we want beyond what was in this bill, they are not, I don't believe, willing to consider except in a regular session. It would be my hope that we would continue to have conversations on statutes of limitation. That was an issue right up until the very end, and it's an issue that needs further development in committee hearings, really extensive review with legal experts about how to do it right and how to get to a position, if we have Republican leadership making the decision, that everybody can support. We had a great proposal on that. And I have a personal commitment from Senator Gazelka that he'd really like to work on this issue. I was pleased that the governor was able to set up a meeting between Senator Gazelka and the families. And I believe the senator is really sincere in his desire to continue to work and understanding that there is more to do. On our side, we really would have liked to see more transformational citizen engagement. We got citizen engagement at the post board level, but on the local level, we would like to see more citizen involvement, community member involvement in the public safety conversation, so that that perspective is represented.
All right, next, Peter Callahan had his hand up.
Well, that was faster than I thought. Can you guys explain to me why you would have adjourned as opposed to recess? I understand that Senator Gazelka would like to have adjourned last time because he didn't want to have pressure still be brought on his members on the policing bill. But that you got the policing bill out of the way, why wouldn't you just recess on the chance that you come to some agreement on the bonding, taxing, and revenue bills and be able to just come in on your own rather than wait till August?
Because Representative Dowd had made it clear to me that they are not going to do a bonding bill until August, and there was really no amount of conversation that could happen that could get them to a yes. There was nothing that they were willing to take other than full renunciation of the emergency powers. And I was texting Senator Gazelka and MMB Commissioner Myron France as late as midnight saying, do we have any chance on this budget bill? Is there any agreement? And there was no chance of anything further getting done at this time. And I made a commitment to my members that we were going to try extremely hard not to meet past midnight. We did make the decision to go a couple hours past midnight to save people having to come in today and get the final couple of items done. But there was no reason to stay. I would have loved to stay. I love being a legislator. I love making laws. That's what we're there to do, is to solve problems. But Senator Gazelka indicated as soon as they passed police reform, they were going to adjourn sine die. So there was no reason to have our members hang out for 2 hours while the Senate debated police reform and adjourn sine die before we adjourn sine die. It was just, that would have been an exercise in futility.
Thanks.
Okay, next question is from Esme Murphy. Can you elaborate on which police departments and which police unions had input? Did they sign off and endorse this? Were Minneapolis Police and the Minneapolis Police Federation among those who participated?
No, the Minnesota Sheriff's Association, I think former Washington County Sheriff, I think he's former, I don't think he's current, Bill Hutton, Chief Potts from the Minnesota Police Chiefs Association, and Brian Peters from the Minnesota Peace and Police Officers Association as the statewide police union were engaged in the conversations and acknowledged that that there is a strong need for reform and wanted to be part of those efforts. And they did sign off and approve the legislation.
And the Minneapolis Police Federation had zero input or conversation about this whatsoever.
You know, I really can't speak to the other side of the aisle. It could have happened in the Minnesota Senate, but as to my conversations, the only law enforcement entities that we talked to and worked with were those three. And I would say that Representative Rena Moran and Brian Peters from the MPPOA developed a relationship over the 1 year of working on the task force to reduce the incidence of deadly force. And that relationship was really critical in allowing us to get the transformational change that we achieved on use of force reform. This really a testament to both Representative Moran and Brian Peters for being willing to do something bold there together.
All right, next question is from Ben Henry with KSTP. Minority Leader Doubt outlined a proposal regarding sharing the peacetime emergency powers that seemed reasonable. What can you share about that and why it wasn't accepted?
So Representative Dowd's proposal would have the power in one branch of the legislature. Either the Senate or the House could terminate the peacetime emergency by themselves. That is not how the legislature acts. In order for a bill to become a law, the House and the Senate have to pass legislation. They both have power. And, you know, I think Representative Dowd is still having difficulty processing the results of the 2018 election. The House of Representatives is a legislative power. We are choosing to exercise our legislative power under Chapter 12 to continue the emergency. It's a conscious decision we have made, I think, at least 4 times, because we believe that COVID-19 is an extreme public health crisis and that Governor Walz needs these emergency powers to protect the people of Minnesota. So Representative Dowd's proposal is nothing short of completely eliminating the governor's ability to act in a time of crisis, and we are not willing to go there. Also, can I just say that the emergency powers and the bonding bill have nothing to do with each other. Representative Dowd could step forward and say, I'm going to fight Governor Walz's use of emergency powers with every fiber of my being, with every member of my party, from now until, you know, we win all the elections, but I'm not going to stand in the way of creating jobs and moving projects forward in our communities. He could say that. It's completely within his power for this bill to get done.
Could I just add that the governor, in fact, made a very reasonable offer to Representative Dowd that would allow the legislature to weigh in and to terminate individual executive orders in the event that the House and Senate agree that we should terminate executive orders individually. But that offer was not acceptable to Representative Dowd. I do not think that Minnesotans want us to hand the ability to address this serious pandemic, this public health crisis, in order to hand it over to Republican legislators in order to give them more leverage in negotiations. This is not a leverage game in people's health. This is not a leverage game in this economy, and that is exactly how they are treating it.
Okay, next question is from Mary LaHammer. You have repeatedly said that the world is watching. What is the world to make of this bill? Is it enough? And how important is it that something pass?
It's a substantial bill. There is a lot here. Banning chokeholds, reforming the use of form doctrine so that sanctity of life is preeminent. Arbitration reform is really significant. Accountability reform, putting a citizens advisory council at the post board. So it's really a great bill, but it is only a first step. It paves the way for transformational change, but it doesn't bring about transformational change. I think that there's a message that is being sent that something has to change, and it has to change radically. The standards that we expect from our police and peace officers is very clear, to value human life in all interactions. So I think it was important. It was important to tell people that their voices were heard. It was especially important to tell the families that the work that they've been doing to bring these issues to the fore were worth it, and we heard them, and that their actions matter. But we're nowhere near done with the work in this area.
I'd just like to also add that the murder of George Floyd and the civil unrest that followed is really the tip of the iceberg of inequality and inequity in Minnesota. And as long as those deep inequities in health and education, income, policing continue to exist, we are going to continue to live on a powder keg. We have seen that a house divided cannot stand. A state divided that is so badly divided like Minnesota is cannot continue to function successfully. And it is vitally important for the world to see us pass this legislation. Of course, it's more important to protect the lives of people in our state. But Minnesota, I think, has suffered a severe reputational hit in the world. And it's because we have revealed the truth of our state, which is that we are among the worst when it comes to racial equality. And that cannot continue. And I hope the world continues to watch. And I hope that we can continue to move forward and get past it. That's why, among other things, or for among other reasons, we passed our resolution yesterday declaring racism a public health crisis, because we need to get serious about being an anti-racist state, because it will take a long time of dedicated work in order to change the inequity on which all of the civil unrest was built this year.
We are committed as the Minnesota House of Representatives, as long as we are in control, to dismantle structural racism in our institution. and to really lead on efforts to undo policies that have resulted in vast inequities. We can't control everything in the state. Obviously, we have a Republican Senate and we have a governor's office that's different than ours. But what we can for sure do is be very aggressive in the Minnesota House of Representatives about being an anti-racist institution and an anti-racist caucus. And that's about more than just wanting things to be fair. That's about addressing inequities that have existed for a long time in a system that is developed in a way that is fundamentally unfair.
Okay, next question is from Walker Ornstein with MinPost. I think you touched on some of this, but criticism from Senate DFLers last night that legislation may not actually change the status quo in some areas. Minneapolis has explored offering incentives for residency. Many departments ban chokeholds except for deadly force. There was a question if police can just independently seek out warrior training or have it provided by a union. Can you respond to the idea that some of these measures may not do much or do what they're aimed at doing?
Yeah, Officer Yanez, who took the life of Philando Castile, had significant hours of warrior training. We learned that in the June 13th hearing, and it is banned now. Nobody can offer it. It doesn't qualify for their credits. So that is a significant change that's important. The chokehold ban, we know that that is going to change things across the state because it wasn't a universal policy. It wasn't required that all departments adopt that. The duty to intercede, perhaps one of the most important reforms coming out of George Floyd's murder. We saw 3 other officers sitting by as Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd, and they had a duty to stop what was happening. And we made that absolutely clear in law. You know, when you look at the Citizen Advisory Council that we created at the Post Board, it's hard to see the transformational change in this moment. But over time, that venue for citizen voices in policing has the possibility of being transformational. The other thing that has the possibility of being transformational is aggregating the data at the state level. Right now, if you want to know what's happening in policing in Minnesota, you have to go to 488 jurisdictions and ask for a copy of the data. By creating a database, we'll start to see data that can inform us on future policy choices. So we've been flying blind on this. The investigatory reform is huge so that we don't have any conflict of interest issues in investigations. So no, I think what we passed is significant. It will change things. I think it will change people's lives. The autism training, very significantly, I think has the strong potential to save lives.
Well, I think the key word there is accountability. Right now, we have a system with very little accountability for bad actors, and the notion that you can get by with anything and that certain police unions will resist and fight any misconduct by an officer, no matter how egregious. We are dismantling the protections that have existed for police officers who repeatedly engage in abusive conduct by arbitration reform. The Post Board is basically, it's a licensing board. So if you have a doctor who repeatedly mistreats patients, you can have a license pulled. In Minnesota, we have the same thing for police officers, but it effectively has had no teeth. We are trying to give it teeth and transparency and information and a different model of governing by including more citizens to be able to provide accountability for police officers. We won't know if it's enough, but we do know that this was what was possible with Republicans controlling the Minnesota Senate right now.
Okay, next question is from Esme Murphy. Is the bonding bill dead for this calendar year? And could it then be passed in the 2021 session with a new legislature?
Well, you know, I have heard indications from the Minnesota Senate GOP that they believe this was the last train to Clarksville. You know, Representative Davids always names his tax bills. And I told him the name for this bill was Last Train to Clarksville, the Monkey song. Because it was represented to us repeatedly through the negotiations that this is it. The Minnesota Senate is in full campaign mode. I've been pretty dedicated to governing for the last 60 days, so we haven't really kind of gotten there in the Minnesota House, but it is, I think, a little bit of a tinderbox over in the Minnesota Senate. So I think it could well be that by the time we get into session in August, there will have been so much negative spending by both of those campaigns against each other and independent spending. And I understand probably a campaign strategy will be to go after the governor, that it may be much, much more difficult to get along and to get things done as we move into the heat of the campaign season. I think there's kind of an unofficial start to the real campaign season right after the primary. We do know we have a lot of Republican members who are facing primaries. So you'd have to ask them if their life gets easier after that. But we are committed to creating jobs and building these projects in our communities. And so we'll be ready to get it done. I think there's a real issue with the governor's office as well, and they can speak to that about their ability to sell bonds. They cannot go to market and sell bonds when there's a bunch of things changing in state finances. And so they would like to go to market right now and sell bonds that have already been authorized by law. And if they were to go forward with that, they wouldn't be able to sell those bonds if we come in August and start taking up issues like a supplemental budget and a bonding bill. So I guess I would just say that the outlook for a bonding bill in August is murky.
But yeah, as the speaker said, we're not going to stop fighting for a bonding bill. We're not going to stop fighting for a supplemental budget bill that funds essential services in Minnesota, including corrections and a temporary pay increase for personal care attendants so they continue to care for people. And we are absolutely not giving up on the Promise Act, which provides necessary emergency relief for businesses hit hard by the civil unrest. So the list keeps getting smaller as we move through the summer, but it's still significant, and we are absolutely dedicated getting that work done.
All right, Theo Keith has a question.
Yeah, my question is about the process. Majority Leader Winkler, you and Leader Gazelka both said that the police bill was very close. There was a tentative deal early in the morning, and then it appeared to fall apart, move backwards to the point where a lot of closed-door negotiations, hours and hours of closed-door negotiations had to take place. Speaker, you mentioned that one of the issues there may have been around chokeholds. Could you say what the other issues that were really touch and go, and was there ever a point where you felt that this wasn't going to get done, that there was some roadblock that was going to stop it from passing?
No, there weren't speed bumps on yesterday, on Monday. We had a tentative agreement on Sunday night, but the difficulty there is we had a term sheet. We had made about 16 offers back and forth. You saw the first two publicly released in the June 19th special session. Our last offer was 11:15 p.m. that night. I think we didn't finally get another counteroffer from the Senate until July 6th. And then we had about 14 exchanges of offers between July 6th and I think it was Saturday that we reached the deal. But then we had to translate that into legislative language. And my 16 years of experience in the legislature have shown me that when you get down to arguing about where does the comma go, is it an and or an or, things always pop up that you didn't anticipate in negotiations. So when you're translating your agreement into legislative language, there are numerous other questions to answer. There's all sorts of details that nobody ever talks about. One example would be the autism training. We all knew we wanted to require 4 hours of autism training, but nobody had ever talked about, was that on top of 16 hours of continuing training that police officers are already required to get, or was that within the 16? So then we have to loop back and figure out, is it on top of or within? Just a myriad of issues like that. And so the reason I didn't come out yesterday morning talking about what would be in the bill is the devil is really in the details. And I knew until we had final legislative language that we shouldn't be talking about the agreement as complete. Sometimes things come up when you're finalizing the language that you can't anticipate. And for me personally, I think actions speak louder than words, and I wanted to stay nose to the grindstone until we had the language worked out. So I'm sorry that I wasn't publicly talking about this agreement yesterday, but we were really wordsmithing right up until I think we finished at like 8:37.
Was there ever a point where you felt like there are roadblocks that this wasn't going to get done, or was the wordsmithing all moving in the right direction?
It was all moving in the right direction. And I think the reason why we were able to get something done was again the families, what happened to George Floyd being so dramatic. Okay, so people were moved, right? But we also had a commitment, not just from me and Senator Gazelka, to work with each other until this got done, but we had business leaders engaged in helping to create space for the conversation. We had leaders in the state like Keith Ellison, Melvin Carter engaged, and the People of Color and Indigenous Caucus really involved all the way along, pushing for the most aggressive bill possible. So there was really such a large number of people who were committed to getting something done that I felt certain that it would. It's just the timing was difficult because we're called in every 30 days because of the governor's emergency. And this is a very complicated bill. We're just 56 days after discovering this very critical work was on our plate and was urgent. And it's a 15 article bill. So there was just a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And I wasn't sure if the Minnesota Senate would actually leave at midnight, and that if this was a, one-time only offer that, we'll take this bill if you get it to us by midnight, but otherwise not. But Senator Gazelka and I have a really strong relationship where we tell each other the truth. And when we say we're going to do something, we do it. And we had an agreement on Saturday night, so I knew we would carry it out.
All right, I've had a couple questions to this effect, but is secrecy now permanently embedded into the legislative process when it comes to final negotiations that actually lead to bills that reach the governor?
Well, I don't think that that's anything new, but what should have happened here is that the first special session should never have been adjourned sine die. So on June 19th, we had a Senate bill that had 5 provisions. We had a House bill that had 18 provisions. And they should have gone to conference. And Representative Mariani and Chair Limmer on the Senate side should have been the co-chairs of a conference committee that included Representative Rena Moran, Senator Bill Ingebrigtsen. And these conversations that we've been having pretty intensively since July 6th all should have started on the morning of Saturday, June 20th, and been in open conference committee. We can do Zoom conference committees. You all should have been able to listen to all these conversations as it went along. And I advocated that we form a conference committee, keep the session open, keep the work going until the police reform and accountability work was done. But it takes 2 bodies that are willing to do it that way.
All right, I think we have time for one more here from Esme Murphy. Did you say this will become law as soon as the governor signs it? Won't it take a while to implement these changes?
I think the effective date for many of the provisions is August 1st. Some of the provisions that are more complex have delayed effective dates so that there can be training of police officers and prosecutors on the change in law before the law goes into effect. But I think it will start having an impact right away, because I think what we're saying very clearly to Minnesotans is that something has to change in Minnesota in our culture of public safety. And there has to be at its core a transformational difference in how we interact, community members and police officers. We have to restore that trust for the safety of the community members and for the safety of the officers who serve the community. We have to trust each other and restore that relationship.
Okay. Well, actually, sorry, I see one more question from Esme. Can you elaborate on the role of business leaders in getting an agreement, and who are the leaders?
Charlie Weaver from the Minnesota Business Partnership. I don't think it's he's been shy about it. There's been several letters released to all legislators. Minnesota businesses are concerned about the quality of life for the members of the community, and the reputation of the state matters. We have to be a state that shows people that when something happens that needs a reaction, that our government is capable of taking action. We also have to send a message to every single member of our community that they count. Minnesota businesses will not be able to recruit talent from all demographic groups if people don't want to move to Minnesota and live in Minnesota, and people don't feel good about it. So the other thing is, Charlie has a lot of experience getting deals done in the Minnesota legislature. So I think he provided wise counsel to many of us. But the same is also true of the Attorney General, the Mayor of St. Paul, and the leaders of the law enforcement organizations.
I just last comment on this. Minnesota demographically has been changing a lot in the last 20 years. And those changes of who we are and who's living in our communities have not met with enough change in our state's culture and the way we look at each other and how we act and the kinds of ways we provide public services. That is holding us back. We cannot be a state that can't find a way to work together and provide for a decent life and public safety for everyone in our communities. That will hold us back. That will ruin our economy. It will make us the kind of place that people don't want to live anymore. And so for the business leaders and law enforcement and others to come together to recognize that this is a problem is a critical first step. Understanding that this deep division based on race or based on income or other factors cannot continue if Minnesota is going to have a better future. And I think it's really hopeful that they are coming to the table to find a way to negotiate, bring change, and make a difference in a positive way for all people in the state. We just need a lot more of it.
And I haven't mentioned the governor's engagement here. At least I don't remember having done that, but he took significant actions to bring people together. I talked a little bit about bringing the families together with Senator Gazelka to hear some of the stories directly that the governor had heard. The governor reaching out to the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association and their leadership. The governor reaching out to Charlie Weaver. So it was definitely a large number of people who were working to make this bill a reality.
All right, we'll wrap it up there. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.